Welcome to the deep dive. Today, especially for those of you studying sociology, we're diving into something really central: how sociologists look at the family.
Yeah, it's a huge topic.
We've got a bunch of different viewpoints lined up, from the classic theories right through to more modern ideas. The aim is really to give you a clear, insightful overview.
Absolutely. And maybe before we jump into the theories themselves, it's probably good to quickly define what we mean by family in sociology.
Good idea.
So generally, we're talking about connections through kinship, blood ties, marriage, civil partnerships, adoption. It's that network of relationships.
Okay, so kinship ties define the family, but that's different from a household, isn't it?
Exactly. A household is just, well, people living under the same roof.
Mm-hmm.
Could be one person, flatmates, or a family.
Right.
The key thing is family kinship, household shared space. That distinction is pretty important for understanding these theories.
Got it. So our mission for this deep dive is to explore how these different sociological theories analyze the family, its structure, its jobs, how it changes. We want to equip you, our listener studying sociology, with a richer toolkit for understanding it all. So where's the best place to start?
Well, a really foundational perspective is functionalism.
Ah,
The
yes.
core idea here is thinking of society um, like a body, an organism.
Yeah.
Every part has a job to do to keep the whole thing running smoothly, and the family has its specific vital roles.
Okay, so for society to function well, what are the family's main jobs, according to functionalists?
Two big ones. First is socialization. The family is seen as the primary place where kids learn the rules, the norms, the values of society.
I like learning how to fit in.
Pretty much, yeah. Understanding what's expected, it helps create social harmony. The second key function is being a support system, providing care, emotional backup, especially when kids are young, nurturing early
Or a
learning.
safety net, almost.
Exactly. Which benefits the individuals in the family, but also society as a whole by, creating stable members.
Makes sense. Now, Tuck Parsons is a big name here, isn't he? What was his specific take on family roles?
He talked about a kind of division of labor he saw as necessary. He had the instrumental role. Usually the man's job, he thought, focused on earning money, being the provider, the leader. He did note this could be stressful.
Okay.
And then there was the expressive role, typically the woman's, which was about providing emotional support, nurturing, keeping things calm at home, sort of balancing out the stress from the instrumental role.
Right, but that sounds very traditional, doesn't it? Very much of its time.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
And it's crucial for any sociology student today to recognize this is a model that's been heavily debated and, frankly, criticized.
I can imagine. So, how did Parsons explain families changing, maybe doing fewer things than they used to, like education moving to schools, healthcare?
Right. He used the idea of structural differentiation. As societies get more complex, he argued, specialized institutions pop up to take over functions the family used to handle, like you said, schools, hospitals, welfare systems.
So the family gets more specialized?
Exactly. Parsons argued this left the family with two core, essential functions that couldn't really be done elsewhere in modern industrial society.
And those were.
Still, number one, the primary socialization of children, that foundational learning, and number two, what he called the stabilization of adult personalities.
Okay, what does that mean exactly?
The idea is the family acts as a kind of warm bath, a haven. It provides emotional security for adults, helping them cope with the stresses of work and life outside, keeping them stable.
Okay, so from this functionalist view, the smaller, more mobile nuclear family fits well with modern industry. And because society is supposedly based on merit, what you achieve, not who your family is, you don't need the big extended kin network as much.
That's the argument, yes.
But what are the big criticisms? What should students be wary of?
Well, a major one is that it paints a very rosy picture, doesn't it? It tends to gloss over conflict, power struggles, abuse, the darker side of family life.
Yeah, it ignores the dysfunction.
Exactly. And that rigid gender division, instrumental expressive, is just seen as incredibly outdated now and ignores how women might be exploited within that setup. It kind of assumes everyone's happy and things are harmonious, which just isn't always the reality.
Okay. So related to this, but maybe with more of a political edge, is the new right perspective.
Yes, there's definitely overlap with functionalism, but the new right comes with a much clearer political stance, usually more conservative.
And what's their core belief about families?
They strongly believe that the traditional nuclear family, two heterosexual parents, ideally married, with clear roles, is the best, most stable environment for raising children.
Why do they think that's the best?
They often argue that having both a mother and a father figure is crucial for proper child development, socialization, and preventing social problems down the line.
So how do they view all the changes we see? More divorce, cohabitation, single parents.
Generally, quite negatively, they tend to see these trends as undermining social stability and potentially harmful to children's well-being. Things like rising divorce rates or births outside marriage are often framed as symptoms of social decline.
And what about things like welfare support from the state?
They're often quite critical. The argument tends to be that generous welfare can create a dependency culture,
Meaning,
meaning it might discourage people from taking personal responsibility, potentially disincentivizing marriage or staying together, and weakening that traditional family structure they favor.
okay, a very clear ideological position there. Let's switch gears completely. What about the Marxist perspective? That offers a very different critique, doesn't it?
Oh, completely different. Marxism views the family through the lens of class, conflict, and capitalism. The basic idea is that the family, like other institutions, primarily serves the interests of the capitalist system and the ruling class.
How so? In what ways does the family help capitalism?
Well, Marxists point to a few key things. First, the family reproduces the workforce. It raises children, socializing them to accept authority, hierarchy, the idea of working for a wage, basically creating the next generation of workers.
Right, churning out compliant labor.
Second, there's the maintenance of the current workforce through unpaid domestic labor, usually done by women, historically. Cooking, cleaning, emotional support, all the stuff that allows workers, mostly men, in traditional Marxist analysis, to go back to work refreshed each day. Capitalism gets this labor for free.
Okay, that's a big economic benefit.
Huge. And third, the family is how property and wealth get passed down. Inheritance maintains class structures over generations, keeping wealth concentrated in the hands of the few.
That sounds pretty cynical about family life.
It is quite critical, yes. Some Marxists, like Loyal Thusser, even talked about the family as part of the ideological state apparatuses.
What does that mean?
It means it's one of the tools, alongside things like education or the media, that subtly teaches people the dominant ideology to accept inequality and the capitalist system as normal or fair.
Wow.
And another thinker, Eli Zaretsky, argued that while the family might feel like a cozy refuge from the harsh, alienating world of work,
A safe haven.
yeah, but he said it doesn't actually solve the underlying problems of capitalism that cause that alienation. It just papers over the cracks, offering temporary comfort without challenging the system itself.
So it's a distraction almost. What are the main criticisms leveled at this Marxist view then? What should students know?
Well, like functionalism, it can be seen as too deterministic, too negative. It often downplays the real love, care, and emotional support that people find in families.
It ignores the good bits.
Right. And the idea that people only marry or form families for purely economic reasons or to pass on wealth seems less convincing today for many people. Love, companionship, personal fulfillment are clearly huge factors now. And similar to early functionalism again, traditional Marxism sometimes didn't pay enough attention to inequalities within the family, especially around gender.
Okay, which is a perfect link to feminist perspectives. And we should stress, it's perspectives plural, right? Not just one view.
Exactly. Feminism isn't monolithic, but what unites the different feminist approaches is a focus on how family structures often create and perpetuate gender inequality, disadvantaging women.
So let's maybe touch on a few key strands. What about liberal feminism?
Liberal feminists tend to focus on achieving equality through gradual reform, changing laws, changing attitudes. They push for things like equal pay, challenging gender stereotypes in schools and the media, better childcare provision, shared parental leave,
Yeah.
making the existing system fairer.
Working within the system for change. Okay. What about radical feminism? They offer a stronger critique, I imagine.
Much stronger. Radical feminists see the family as a fundamental pillar of patriarchy, a system where men dominate women. They argue the family is inherently structured to benefit men, giving them power and control, sometimes through domestic violence or the threat of it. They really highlight women's unpaid domestic work as exploitation that props up men and capitalism.
A very critical view. And then there's Marxist feminism. How does that fit in?
Marxist feminists try to connect the dots between capitalism and patriarchy. They argue women face a dual oppression.
Meaning oppressed by both systems.
Yes. Exploited by capitalism in the workplace, low pay discrimination, and exploited by patriarchy in the home, unpaid labor, subordination. Thinkers like Delphi and Leonard argue the family socializes future workers and ties women to the home, which also kind of keeps men from rebelling against their own exploitation because they have someone to dominate at home.
That's a complex picture of intersecting oppressions. So, what are the counter-arguments? How have these feminist views been criticized?
Well, some argue they can paint too bleak a picture, suggesting all families are oppressive, which ignores many loving egalitarian relationships.
Sure, not every family fits that mold.
Critics also point to progress more women working, gaining economic independence. And the fact that women now initiate the majority of divorces in many Western countries is sometimes seen as evidence of female agency, not just victimhood. Women are choosing to leave relationships that don't work for them.
Right. That shows a degree of power. Okay, so we've gone through functionalism, New Right, Marxism, feminism. What about the postmodernist perspective? This feels like a different beast altogether.
It really is. Postmodernism generally rejects those big, overarching theories, what they call grand narratives, that try to explain everything. It emphasizes complexity, diversity, fragmentation.
So, applied to the family, what does that mean? No single explanation fits.
Exactly. Postmodernists argue there's no longer one normal or dominant family type. Instead, we live in a time of immense diversity in relationships and household structures. Think single-parent families, same-sex couples, blended families, people living alone, cohabiting. The list goes on.
A whole menu of options almost.
Kind of, yeah. And a key feature they highlight is the emphasis on individual choice and personal fulfillment. People are seen as actively choosing the kinds of relationships and family lives that suit them, rather than just following traditional scripts.
And things like higher divorce rates or more births outside marriage are seen. How?
Not necessarily as social problems, like the new right might see them, but more as indicators that people are prioritizing their own happiness and are willing to change arrangements that aren't working. It reflects that focus on individual needs and fluidity.
So, if family life is so fragmented and diverse, does that make the older theories like functionalism or Marxism kind of redundant for sociology students trying to understand today's world?
That's certainly what postmodernists would argue. They'd say those grand theories, trying to find universal functions or structures, just can't grasp the sheer variety and complexity of contemporary families.
So, we need new tools.
Yes.
Hmm.
Postmodernism calls for more flexible, context-specific ways of understanding families, ways that acknowledge diversity and constant change. It's a really important challenge for sociology today. How do our theories keep up with lived reality?
It definitely feels like theories need to be as dynamic as the families themselves. Wow. Okay, we've covered a huge range there. From functionalism's focus on society's needs right through to the postmodern embrace of anything goes almost. You mentioned a summary table, maybe a quick recap using that would help cement these ideas for our listener.
Good idea. So, super quick review for the sociology students listening. Functionalism family, vital functions, socialization support. For social stability, criticized for being too rosy, outdated on gender. Nuclear family, best for kids and society. Criticized for being narrow, judgmental of diversity. Marxism family, serves capitalism, workers, inheritance, ideology. Criticized for being too negative, ignoring love, missing gender dynamics initially.
Right.
Feminist perspectives family reinforces gender inequality patriarchy, liberal reform, radical overhaul, Marxist dual oppression. Criticized for maybe being too negative sometimes, but highlighting crucial power dynamics.
Yeah.
And finally, postmodernism rejects grand theories, emphasizes diversity, choice, fluidity, calls for new ways to study families.
That's a great snapshot. It really shows how looking through these different sociological lenses gives you such different pictures of the same thing, the family. So for you listening, the big takeaway, especially if you're studying sociology, is that no single theory has all the answers, right?
Absolutely not. Each one offers valuable insights, asks important questions, but each also has blind spots and limitations.
Your job, really, as someone learning sociology, is to get to grips with these different perspectives, understand their assumptions, and then think critically about which ones help you make sense of the incredibly varied family lives we see around us today.
Exactly. And it leads to that really interesting question for today's sociology. Given how much families are changing, how diverse they've become, especially in what we might call this postmodern era, how do these classic theories need to adapt or evolve?
Or what completely new questions should sociologists be asking now?
Precisely. What are the emerging issues? What new theoretical tools do we need? That's where the field is moving, and it's something you, as future sociologists, might well contribute to.
It's certainly food for thought. Understanding these foundational sociological perspectives gives you such a vital framework, not just for exams, but for analyzing the social world long after you finish your studies. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.